Ionamunch. Story 1. The Loop on Interstate 40. Robert Hayes had been driving 18-wheelers for 23 years, hauling everything from electronics to livestock across the continental United States. He'd seen his share of strange things on the road, wildlife behaving oddly, mysterious lights in the sky, fog so thick it seemed alive, but nothing prepared him for what happened on Interstate 40 through the Oklahoma Panhandle in September of 2022. Robert was hauling a load of agricultural equipment from Amarillo to Little Rock, a route he'd driven dozens of times before. The pay was decent, the timeline reasonable, and the weather forecast clear. He left the truck stop in Amarillo at 11:45 in the evening, planning to make good time through the night when traffic was light. His Kenworth T680 hummed smoothly as he merged onto the interstate, the familiar weight of 38,000 pounds of cargo settling behind him. The CB radio crackled occasionally with distant chatter from other drivers, and his GPS showed a straightforward route ahead. Robert sipped his coffee, adjusted his seat, and settled in for what should have been an unremarkable night of driving. The first sign that something was wrong came around 1:30 in the morning. Robert had just passed the exit for Elk City, Oklahoma, a town he'd stopped in countless times for fuel and food. The highway stretched empty in both directions, illuminated only by his headlights cutting through the darkness. He noticed a green mile marker sign approaching on the right side of the road. Mile 41. He'd seen that marker before on this route, nothing unusual about it, but then about 15 minutes later he saw it again. Mile 41, the exact same marker. Robert frowned and glanced at his odometer. He definitely traveled more than 15 miles. His GPS showed him progressing normally along Interstate 40, the little blue dot moving steadily eastward. He shook his head, assuming he'd misread the first marker, or that there was some quirk in the mile marker system he'd never noticed. He kept driving, watching the white lines disappear beneath his truck in the hypnotic rhythm that came with long-haul driving. 20 minutes later, he passed mile 41 again. This time, there was no mistaking it. The sign looked identical, same green background, same white lettering, even the same small dent in the lower left corner that he'd specifically noticed the first time. Robert felt a cold sensation creep up his spine. He grabbed his CB radio mic. Breaker 19, this is Rattlesnake Robert eastbound on I-40 near Elk City. Anyone copy? Static answered him. He tried again. Nothing. Not even the ambient chatter that usually filled the airwaves. The silence felt oppressive, unnatural. He looked at his GPS again. According to the device, he was exactly where he should be, steadily approaching the next town. But the landscape outside his window told a different story. He recognized every detail of this stretch of road, the specific curve ahead, the cluster of 3 billboards advertising the same tire shop, the distinctive rock formation barely visible in the darkness to his south. He'd passed these landmarks 3 times now. Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His rational mind tried to find explanations. Maybe he was more tired than he thought, experiencing some kind of hallucination brought on by fatigue. But he felt wide awake, his coffee still hot in the cup holder, his mind sharp and clear. He pinched himself hard enough to leave a mark. The pain was real. Everything felt real. He decided to test his theory. As he approached the cluster of 3 billboards, he grabbed a red marker from his console. When he passed close enough to the first billboard, he made a mental note of its exact position. Then he waited, continuing to drive at a steady 65 miles per hour. Sure enough, after another stretch of time that felt like 20 minutes, the billboards appeared again. But this time, Robert noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the first billboard, someone had drawn a red circle, exactly where he'd thought about marking it, though he'd never actually left his cab. The phenomenon continued. Every loop, and Robert had started thinking of them as loops, brought him past the same landmarks in the same order. Mile 41. The three billboards. A distinctive overpass with graffiti that read "Tommy was here 1987." A dead armadillo on the shoulder that never moved from its position. Each cycle took approximately 23 minutes. Robert timed it carefully, using the digital clock on his dashboard. What terrified him most was that his truck was consuming fuel normally. The gauge showed steady depletion. His odometer continued to climb. According to every instrument in his cab, he was traveling forward, covering distance, burning diesel. But the world outside insisted he was going nowhere at all. Around the fifth loop, Robert noticed he wasn't alone. A pair of taillights appeared ahead of him, another vehicle traveling in the same direction. Hope surged through him. He accelerated, trying to catch up, desperate for any human contact, any confirmation that he wasn't losing his mind. But no matter how fast he drove, pushing 75, then 80 miles per hour, the distance between him and those taillights never changed. They remained exactly the same distance ahead, as if connected by an invisible tether. Then he saw the vehicle itself as he crested a small rise. It was a pickup truck, old and battered, and it was traveling backward. The driver faced him through the rear window, hands on the wheel, but the truck moved forward along the highway while pointing in reverse. The driver's face was pale, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror. Robert laid on his horn, the sound blaring into the empty night. But the backward truck simply faded from view, dissolving like mist as he approached. The loops continued. Robert lost count after 20. His CB radio remained dead. His cell phone showed no signal, though it had displayed full bars when he'd checked it in Amarillo. He tried pulling over, thinking maybe if he stopped, the phenomenon would break. But when he hit the brakes, his truck slowed but never actually stopped. The speedometer dropped to 0, the engine settled into an idle, but the landscape continued sliding past his windows at the same steady pace. Panic gave way to a strange, numb acceptance. Robert kept his hands on the wheel, his eyes on the road, driving a route he could now navigate blindfolded. He started noticing smaller details with each loop. The way the stars never moved in the sky, remaining fixed in exactly the same positions. How his coffee never got cold, never decreased in the cup no matter how many sips he took. The song playing on his radio, a classic rock station out of Oklahoma City, was the same song, at the same point in the lyrics every time the loop reset. On what might have been the 40th loop, Robert saw something new. A figure stood on the shoulder near mile 41. As he approached, his headlights illuminated a man in a trucker's uniform, arm raised in the universal gesture for hitchhiker. But this man's skin was gray, his eyes hollow black pits, and his mouth stretched impossibly wide. Robert didn't slow down. The figure turned its head to follow his passing, that terrible mouth opening wider. And Robert swore he could hear screaming even through his closed windows and over the engine noise. The next loop, there were 2 figures, then 4, then dozens lining both sides of the highway, all with those hollow eyes and screaming mouths. They reached toward him as he passed, their arms stretching unnaturally long, fingers scraping against his trailer with sounds like nails on metal. Robert prayed. He wasn't a religious man, hadn't been to church since his childhood, but he prayed with desperate intensity. He promised to be a better person, to call his daughter more often, to donate to charity, anything if he could just break free from this nightmare. The figures continued to multiply, their screaming growing louder, pressing closer to his truck. Then suddenly one of them spoke, not with a voice he heard, but words that appeared directly in his mind. "You're not supposed to be here." The statement carried weight, certainty, as if Robert had somehow wandered into a space that existed outside normal reality. A pocket dimension where the rules of physics and time didn't apply. He closed his eyes, still driving, and thought with all his strength about his destination. Little Rock. the warehouse where he was supposed to deliver his cargo, his wife waiting for his phone call. The life he'd left behind when he'd entered this loop. He visualized it with perfect clarity, refusing to acknowledge the screaming figures or the impossible repetition around him. When he opened his eyes, something had changed. The sky had shifted from black to the deep purple of pre-dawn. The figures were gone, and ahead he saw a sign he'd been desperate to see. Oklahoma City, 47 miles. He'd broken free from the loop, somehow skipped ahead dozens of miles from where he'd been trapped. Robert pulled into the first truck stop he found, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the parking. Other truckers milled about, fueling up, grabbing coffee, living their normal lives. He checked his phone. 3 hours had passed since he'd left Amarillo. According to his logs, he should have been trapped in that loop for at least 6 or 7 hours. But time outside the phenomenon had barely moved forward. He completed his delivery to Little Rock, said nothing to anyone about what had happened. Who would believe him? But Robert never drove Interstate 40 through that stretch of Oklahoma again. He'd reroute hundreds of miles out of his way to avoid it. And sometimes, late at night when he was driving other highways, he'd glance at his mile markers with a spike of fear, wondering if he'd see one repeat, wondering if the loop was waiting for him somewhere else, patient and hungry, ready to catch him again in its impossible embrace. Story 2. The facility that wasn't there. Patricia Sullivan had spent 19 years behind the wheel, mostly running routes through the Pacific Northwest. She specialized in hazmat transport, which meant better pay but more regulations, more careful driving, and routes that often took her to isolated industrial facilities far from major population centers. In June of 2023, she accepted a job that would fundamentally alter her understanding of reality. The manifest was straightforward. Pick up sealed containers from a facility in rural Washington state and deliver them to a processing plant near Portland. The containers were labeled with standard hazmat codes, though the specific contents were listed as classified. Patricia had transported classified materials before, usually for defense contractors or pharmaceutical companies, so this wasn't unusual. The pickup location, however, was new to her. The GPS coordinates pointed to a spot in the Cascade Range, accessible via a series of increasingly remote Forest Service roads. Patricia left Seattle at dawn, her Peterbilt 389 loaded light for the pickup run. The weather was perfect, clear skies and mild temperatures. She always appreciated June in Washington before the summer heat set in. The route took her east on Interstate 90 before branching off onto smaller highways, then county roads, and finally onto gravel Forest Service roads that made her grateful for her truck's suspension. The deeper she went into the mountains, the more isolated she became. Cell phone coverage disappeared. Her CB radio picked up nothing but static. Even her satellite GPS seemed to struggle, the signal flickering occasionally. According to her directions, the facility should have been visible after a final turn at a distinctive lightning-struck tree. Patricia found the tree, a massive Douglas fir split down the middle, blackened and dead, and made the turn. The road ahead was freshly paved, which struck her as odd given how rough the approach had been. Fresh asphalt in the middle of nowhere with perfect yellow center lines and new reflectors catching her headlights. The facility appeared after 2 miles of this perfect road. It was enormous, far larger than Patricia had expected for such a remote location. The main building was a concrete cube, maybe 4 stories tall, with no windows she could see. Smaller outbuildings surrounded it, along with multiple satellite dishes and antenna arrays. The entire complex was surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. Security cameras were visible at regular intervals. What caught Patricia's attention most was the lighting. The facility was brilliantly illuminated, every corner visible under powerful floodlights, creating an island of artificial daylight in the mountain darkness. She pulled up to the gate where a guard station stood empty. Patricia sat in her cab, waiting, but nobody appeared. After 5 minutes, she tried her air horn. The sound echoed off the surrounding mountains but prompted no response. Then the gate simply rolled open on its own, smooth and silent. An electronic sign beside the gate displayed a message. Proceed to loading dock 3. Patricia hesitated. Something felt wrong. The emptiness, the automatic systems, the scale of the facility in such a remote location. It all triggered her instincts that something was off. But she'd signed a contract and she needed the payment. More importantly, Patricia prided herself on her professionalism. She'd never failed to complete a job. She pulled through the gate, which closed automatically behind her. The facility was like a small city. Patricia followed signs to loading dock 3, passing buildings labeled with numbers and letters, but no indication of their purpose. She saw no people, no other vehicles, no movement of any kind. The loading dock was a massive concrete platform with multiple bay doors. Only one was open, and a forklift sat beside it, unmanned, with 4 sealed containers already loaded on its pallet. Patricia backed her trailer to the dock with practiced precision. She set her brakes, grabbed her manifest paperwork, and climbed down from the cab. The air smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, but artificial, like being inside a laboratory. The concrete beneath her boots was pristine, not a stain or crack visible. Everything felt too clean, too new, too perfect. The containers were black metal, roughly the size of oil drums, with hazmat labels and serial numbers, but no indication of contents beyond the classification codes. Each weighed exactly 200 pounds according to the manifest. Patricia checked the seals, all intact, and began loading them into her trailer using the facility's forklift, which started with the press of a button but operated with eerie silence. As she worked, Patricia became increasingly aware of being watched. She could see security cameras, yes, but this was different. It felt like human eyes on her back. She turned several times quickly, trying to catch whoever might be observing her, but saw no one. The sensation persisted, growing stronger. Loading complete, Patricia secured the containers and closed her trailer doors. She needed someone to sign her manifest, confirming the pickup. She waited at the loading dock for 10 minutes, then 15. Nobody appeared. Finally, she walked to the door leading into the facility. It opened at her approach, sliding aside automatically. Inside was a corridor lined with more doors, all closed, all unmarked. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile white glow. Patricia called out. Her voice sounded flat, absorbed by the walls rather than echoing. She tried several doors, all locked. The corridor stretched ahead, seeming to extend far deeper into the building than should have been possible based on the exterior dimensions she'd observed. Then she heard footsteps. Not normal footsteps, but something that sounded wrong. Too heavy, with an odd rhythm like someone walking with 3 legs. The sound came from deeper in the facility. Patricia's instincts screamed at her to leave. She turned back toward the loading dock. The corridor had changed. The door she'd entered through was gone, replaced by more blank wall and more doors. Patricia ran, her boots pounding on the linoleum floor, heart hammering. She tried every door she passed, all locked. The footsteps behind her grew louder, closer, accompanied now by a sound like heavy breathing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She found a door that opened. Inside was a room full of computer equipment, servers, and monitors displaying data she couldn't understand. One monitor showed camera feeds from around the facility. Patricia saw herself in one feed standing in the server room. But in another feed, she saw her truck at the loading dock, with herself walking around it, checking the containers. 2 versions of herself existing simultaneously. The footsteps reached the door. Patricia looked at the monitor showing the corridor outside. Nothing was there. The footsteps continued right outside the door, but the camera showed an empty hallway. She backed away from the door, bumping into a server rack. Her hand found a keyboard. Almost without thinking, she started typing, looking for any way to unlock the exit. A file appeared on the nearest monitor, a personnel roster. Patricia scanned the names, dozens of them listed with dates. Employment dates, she realized. But the termination dates were all the same, August 15th, 2019. Every single person had been terminated on the same day nearly 4 years ago. The facility had been empty since then, operating itself. She found another file marked Incident Report. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The text described a containment failure, an energy discharge, something about dimensional boundaries and quantum instability. The words were technical, beyond her understanding, but the conclusion was clear. The facility had been evacuated after some kind of accident. An accident that, according to the report, had made the facility temporally and spatially unstable. The breathing sound grew louder. Patricia looked at the monitor showing the corridor, still empty. But then she saw it on a different monitor, one showing a camera angle from further down the hallway. A figure stood there, but it was wrong. It flickered, jumping between positions without moving through the space between. One moment it was far away, the next moment closer, not walking, but existing in different locations sequentially. And it was coming toward her. Patricia ran from the server room, bursting into the corridor. This time the exit was visible, the door to the loading dock just ahead. She sprinted, not looking back, hearing that impossible footstep rhythm behind her. She hit the door at full speed, practically falling onto the loading dock. Her truck sat where she'd left it, containers loaded, everything secure. Patricia climbed into the cab, started the engine, and drove. The gate opened automatically as she approached. She didn't slow down, didn't stop, didn't look back. She drove down that perfect paved road, back onto the rough forest service roads, back towards civilization. When she reached the county highway, Patricia pulled over and grabbed her paperwork. The manifest for the pickup was complete, signed and stamped with the facility's official seal. But the signature wasn't in any handwriting she recognized. It looked almost like a machine had drawn it, perfectly uniform letters that merely approximated human script. She delivered the containers to Portland as contracted. The receiving facility accepted them without comment. Patricia collected her payment, but she spent the next week trying to find any information about the pickup location. She searched satellite maps, contacted the Forestry Service, even tried calling the phone number on her manifest. The satellite maps showed nothing but forest at those coordinates. The Forestry Service had no record of any facilities in that area. The phone number was disconnected. Patricia made the mistake of going back. She took a few days off, rented an SUV, and drove to those same coordinates. She found the lightning-struck tree. She made the turn. But instead of the perfect paved road, she found only an overgrown Forest Service road that ended after a quarter-mile in a rusted gate with no trespassing signs. Beyond the gate, trees that looked decades old grew thick and untouched. There was no facility, no cleared land, no evidence anything had ever been there. She asked other truckers if they'd heard of the place. Most had no idea what she was talking about. But one old-timer, a driver named Frank who'd been hauling for 35 years, gave her a strange look when she described it. "You talking about the Cascade facility?" he asked. "Place that doesn't exist?" Patricia nodded. Frank shook his head. "I picked up from there once, back in '98. Tried to go back, couldn't find it. Every few years I hear about another driver who's been there. We compare notes sometimes. It's always the same story. The place is there, then it isn't. I got a theory, but you'll think I'm crazy." Patricia asked him to share. Frank leaned close and whispered, "I think it's only there when it needs something. when it needs a delivery or a pickup, or maybe when it needs a witness. Then it appears, uses you for whatever it needs, and disappears again. You were chosen, Patricia. Question is, why? Patricia never accepted another hazmat job involving classified materials. She stuck to known routes, familiar facilities, companies with public addresses, and normal office hours. But sometimes late at night she'd drive past that turn near the lightning-struck tree. And sometimes, just for a moment, she'd see lights in the distance, deep in the forest where nothing should be. She never stopped to investigate. Some mysteries she decided were better left alone. Story 3. The Cargo That Watched. Marcus Chen had been in the trucking business for 15 years, specializing in refrigerated transport. He'd hauled everything from frozen food to medical supplies, always maintaining perfect temperature logs and never losing a shipment to spoilage. In November of 2021, he accepted a job that would make him question everything he thought he knew about the cargo he transported. The job came through a broker Marcus had worked with before, a company that specialized in medical and pharmaceutical transport. The manifest was unusual but not unprecedented. Biological samples being moved from a research facility in upstate New York to a laboratory in Maryland. The cargo required constant refrigeration at exactly 36 degrees Fahrenheit, with temperature monitoring every hour. The pay was excellent, almost double his normal rate, which the broker explained was due to the cargo's sensitivity and the tight delivery window. Marcus picked up the shipment from a facility near Albany on a Tuesday morning. The loading was handled by techs in full biosafety gear, which wasn't uncommon for biological materials. The cargo consisted of 12 identical containers, each about the size of a large cooler made of brushed steel with digital temperature readouts on their sides. They were secured in his refrigerated trailer with unusual care, strapped down with redundant tie-downs and separated by foam padding. The head technician, a woman named Dr. Reeves, gave Marcus specific instructions. Do not open the trailer doors until you reach the destination. Do not stop except for fuel. If any of the container alarms sound, call this number immediately. She handed him a card with a phone number. And whatever you do, don't look directly at the containers for prolonged periods if you need to check them. That last instruction struck Marcus as odd. Why not? Dr. Reeves hesitated. The samples can be disturbing to observe. It's a psychological effect, nothing dangerous, but it's better to minimize exposure. Quick checks of the temperature readouts only. Marcus had transported plenty of unpleasant biological materials before. Diseased tissue samples, contaminated blood, even human organs for transplant. He'd never been warned about psychological effects, but Dr. Reeves seemed serious, even nervous, so he agreed to follow her instructions. The drive started normally. Marcus merged onto Interstate 87 heading south, his refrigeration unit humming steadily, maintaining perfect temperature. Every hour as required, he pulled over at rest areas to check the cargo through his trailer's internal access door. Each time he'd climb into the refrigerated space, verify the temperature readouts on all 12 containers, and log the data. The containers sat silent and still, their digital displays showing a steady 36 degrees. The first sign something was wrong came around hour 4, somewhere in Pennsylvania. Marcus was conducting his scheduled check, clipboard in hand, working his way through the containers. As he approached the 6th container, he felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. Not the general awareness of security cameras or other drivers that he'd grown accustomed to, but the specific, intense feeling of eyes focusing on him with hostile intent. He looked at the container. The steel surface was smooth and featureless except for the temperature display. Nothing to see. But the sensation persisted, so strong it made his skin crawl. Marcus remembered Dr. Reeves' warning about not looking directly at the containers. He finished his check quickly and returned to his cab. The sensation didn't leave. As Marcus drove, he became increasingly aware of the cargo behind him. Not just aware of its presence, but feeling watched through the insulated wall separating the trailer from his cab. He adjusted his mirrors repeatedly, irrationally checking the trailer exterior as if he might see something. The feeling grew stronger with each passing mile. At hour 6, during his next temperature check, Marcus saw something that made him question his sanity. As he logged the data from the 8th container, he could swear he saw movement inside the display. Not the numbers changing, they remained stable, but something moving behind the numbers, like a shadow passing behind frosted glass. He blinked, looked again. Nothing. Just the digital readout showing 36 degrees. But then he noticed something else. Condensation had formed on the inside of the container's small viewing port, a reinforced glass circle no bigger than a quarter. The condensation had patterns in it, swirls and shapes that seemed almost deliberate. As Marcus watched, the patterns shifted, reorganizing themselves into something that looked disturbingly like a handprint, a small handprint like a child's pressed against the glass from the inside. Marcus backed away, his heart racing. He told himself it was just random condensation, pareidolia making him see patterns that weren't really there. But then he looked at the other containers. Each one had condensation on its viewing port. Each one showed patterns. And in every case, the patterns looked like handprints. 12 containers, 12 small handprints, all pressed against the glass from inside. He called the number Dr. Reeves had given him. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Marcus left a message describing what he was seeing, trying to keep his voice steady. No callback came. He tried 3 more times over the next hour. No answer. The sensation of being watched intensified. Marcus became convinced that whatever was in those containers was aware of him, studying him, perhaps communicating with each other about him. His rational mind fought against these thoughts. The containers held biological samples, nothing more. Tissue cultures, maybe viral samples, medical specimens being transported for research. There was a scientific explanation for everything he was experiencing. But then the sounds started. Around hour 9, as darkness fell and Marcus drove through rural Maryland, he heard tapping from the trailer. Rhythmic, deliberate tapping, like someone knocking on metal from inside. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. The pattern repeated, never varying. Marcus turned up his radio, trying to drown it out, but he could still hear it, could feel it vibrating through the truck. He pulled into a rest area, intending to check the cargo again, but found himself unable to open the trailer door. Not because it was stuck, but because he was terrified of what he might find. The tapping continued, patient and persistent. Marcus sat in his cab, hands shaking, debating whether to abandon the job entirely. The pay was good, but no amount of money was worth this psychological torture. His phone rang. Dr. Reeves. Mr. Chen, I got your messages. I need you to stay calm and listen carefully. What you're experiencing is real, but it's not dangerous. The samples are neural tissue from individuals who died, but whose brain activity didn't fully cease. We're transporting them to a facility that can properly study the phenomenon. They're aware in a limited sense, but they cannot harm you. The containers are completely secure. Marcus felt his stomach drop. You're telling me I'm hauling conscious tissue? Brains? Partial consciousness, Dr. Reeves corrected. Fragments of awareness trapped in preserved neural tissue. They're responding to external stimuli. You, primarily. They know someone is there, but they're contained, and they'll remain contained. You need to complete the delivery. We're tracking your progress. You're less than an hour from the destination. This is insane, Marcus said, and this can't be legal. This can't be ethical. The ethics are complicated, Dr. Reeves admitted. But the legality is covered. These individuals donated their bodies to science. We're following their wishes. Please, Mr. Chen. One more hour. The destination facility has people standing by. They'll unload quickly and you can leave. Marcus wanted to refuse. He wanted to open the trailer, push those containers out onto the highway, and drive away. But something in Dr. Reeves' voice made him hesitate. Desperation, maybe, or fear. Whatever was in those containers, abandoning them wasn't the answer. He drove. The tapping continued, now joined by other sounds. Scratching like fingernails on metal. A sound that might have been whispering, though that should have been impossible through the insulated walls. And underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to resonate in Marcus's chest, making his heart beat in synchronization with whatever was producing the sound. The handprints on the viewing ports, Marcus realized, weren't random. They were trying to communicate. He couldn't check them safely while driving, but he was convinced that if he looked now, he'd find the patterns had changed, arranged themselves into letters or symbols. Whatever fragments of consciousness existed in those containers were aware enough to attempt contact. The thought that terrified Marcus most was that these weren't just neural tissue samples. They were people, or had been people. Reduced to preserved brain matter in steel containers, aware enough to know their situation, to feel the transportation, to sense the person driving them to an unknown destination. What must that be like? What kind of trapped hell were they experiencing? The destination facility appeared exactly when Dr. Reeves had promised, a nondescript building in an industrial park outside Baltimore. Security guards waved Marcus through the gate. A loading team in biosafety suits waited at the dock. They worked with remarkable efficiency, removing all 12 containers from his trailer in less than 10 minutes. Marcus watched from his cab, afraid to get too close. As the last container was wheeled away on a dolly, Marcus saw something through its viewing port. The condensation had formed new patterns. Not a handprint this time, but letters. 2 words, written backwards so they'd be readable from outside. Help us. Then the container was gone, disappeared into the facility, and Marcus was alone on the loading dock with just his empty trailer and his racing thoughts. A technician approached with payment authorization and release paperwork. Marcus signed, everything with numb hands. He should have refused the job. He should have called the police, the FDA, the ethics board of whatever medical organization oversaw this kind of research. But he didn't. He took his payment, started his truck, and drove away. Marcus never took another medical transport job. He switched to hauling dry goods, furniture, anything that definitely, absolutely had never been alive and aware. But the memory of those containers haunted him. The handprints, the tapping, the desperate plea for help written in condensation. Weeks later, Marcus looked up the facility where he'd made the pickup. He found archived news articles about a controversial research program that had been shut down 3 years earlier after ethical violations. The program had studied near-death experiences and post-mortem neural activity. It had been terminated, the articles said, and all research materials destroyed. But apparently something had survived. Samples had been preserved, hidden, continued in secret. Marcus tried to contact Dr. Reeves to demand answers, to threaten exposure. The phone number no longer worked. The research facility in Albany had no record of anyone by that name. The destination facility in Baltimore, when Marcus drove past it again, was empty, the building marked with 4 lease signs. It was as if the entire job had never happened, except for the payment in his bank account and the memories that woke him up screaming in the middle of the night. He still drives trucks because it's all he knows, all he's qualified for. But Marcus never takes jobs through brokers anymore. He never hauls refrigerated cargo. And whenever he passes a truck carrying medical supplies, he wonders what might be inside, what fragments of consciousness might be trapped in containers, aware and afraid and desperately trying to communicate with a world that's left them behind. The road has taught him that the cargo we transport isn't always as dead as it appears, and some deliveries extract a price far greater than the payment they provide. Story 4. The Highway That Forgot. Jennifer Morrison had been driving professionally for 27 years, making her one of the most experienced independent owner-operators in the Midwest. She'd purchased her own Freightliner Cascadia 8 years ago and built a reputation for reliability and safety. In March of 2024, she accepted a routine delivery from Chicago to Omaha that would force her to confront a stretch of highway that seemed to exist outside normal reality. The load was standard commercial freight, nothing unusual or hazardous. Jennifer left Chicago just after midnight, planning to reach Omaha by early afternoon. The route was Interstate 80 heading west, a highway she'd driven hundreds of times. Weather was clear, traffic light, conditions perfect for making good time. Her GPS showed the familiar route, her CB radio picked up chatter from other truckers, and her playlist of 80s rock provided the soundtrack for what should have been an unremarkable drive. The first indication of a problem came around 4 in the morning, somewhere in rural Iowa. Jennifer had just passed the exit for a small town called Walcott when she noticed something odd about the highway ahead. The road surface changed abruptly from the slightly worn concrete she'd been driving on to asphalt that looked brand new, so fresh she could smell the tar through her air vents. The transition was a perfect line across the highway, like someone had laid new pavement right up against the old without any gradual blend. Jennifer thought nothing of it initially. Road construction was common, though it was unusual to encounter a transition this sharp. She continued driving, watching the white lines disappear beneath her truck at a steady rate. But after 20 minutes of driving on this new pavement, she realized she hadn't seen any mile markers, exit signs, or other vehicles. The highway stretched ahead in a perfect straight line, vanishing into the darkness beyond her headlights' reach. She checked her GPS. The device showed her progressing normally along Interstate 80, with the next town about 15 miles ahead. But looking out at the featureless highway, Jennifer saw nothing that matched the GPS display. No underpasses, no entrance ramps, no signs of civilization at all. Just the endless perfect asphalt and the white lines and the darkness pressing in from both sides. The CB radio had gone silent. Jennifer tried calling out, "Breaker, breaker, this is Iowa Jennifer westbound on 80, anyone got ears?" Static answered her. She switched channels, trying the emergency frequency, then back to the main trucking channel. Nothing. Not even the background noise that usually filled the airwaves. Complete silence, as if her radio had stopped receiving any signal at all. Jennifer's unease grew. She checked her speedometer. 65 miles per hour, steady and consistent. Her odometer showed she'd covered about 30 miles since the pavement transition. But she hadn't passed a single landmark, hadn't seen any variation in the landscape. The highway just continued straight and perfect and eerily empty. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A sign appeared in her headlights. Walcott exit 284, 2 miles. Jennifer had passed Walcott at least 45 minutes ago. She couldn't be approaching it again. But there was the sign clearly visible, identical to the one she'd seen earlier. She pressed harder on the accelerator, feeling a surge of panic. If she was somehow back at Walcott, then she'd lost an hour of driving, covered no actual distance despite her instruments showing otherwise. The exit appeared. Jennifer had a choice. Take it or continue on the highway. Something told her that taking the exit would be a mistake, that leaving the highway might strand her somewhere even worse than this endless road. She stayed on Interstate 80, watching the Walcott exit slip past. 5 minutes later, she saw the same sign again. Walcott exit 284, 2 miles. This time, Jennifer noticed additional details. The sign itself was pristine, not a speck of dirt or a single bullet hole from vandals. The reflective surface gleamed perfectly in her headlights. Real highway signs accumulated damage and dirt. This one looked like it had been installed minutes ago. Jennifer passed the exit again. And again, 5 minutes later, the warning sign appeared. She was in a loop, she realized, but not like the time loops she'd read about in science fiction. This was a geographic loop. The highway was feeding her through the same section repeatedly, like a treadmill keeping her in place while her instruments insisted she was making progress. She decided to test something. As she approached the exit for the 4th time, Jennifer took it, turning off Interstate 80 onto the exit ramp. The ramp curved right as exit ramps do, leading toward what should have been Walcott. But instead of the town, the ramp simply circled back, reconnecting with the highway exactly where she'd left it. The entire exit was a loop, bringing her right back to the same point. Jennifer found herself westbound on Interstate 80 again, approaching the same sign for the same exit. Panic gave way to a strange, methodical determination. Jennifer was a problem solver by nature, someone who dealt with breakdowns, weather delays, and difficult cargo situations with calm logic. She approached this impossible situation the same way. The highway was behaving in a manner that defied physics and geography. Therefore, she needed to find the rules governing this new reality and use them to escape. She tried driving slower. Same result. She tried driving faster, pushing 75 miles per hour. Same result. She tried driving with her lights off, using only the highway reflectors. Same result. Every variation brought her past the Walcott exit every 5 minutes, as predictable as a clock. Then Jennifer noticed something new. On her 7th or 8th pass of the exit, she saw another vehicle. A car, small and dark, parked on the shoulder just beyond the exit ramp. As she passed, her headlights briefly illuminated the interior. Someone sat in the driver's seat, unmoving, face turned toward her. She couldn't make out details, but the figure's stillness was unsettling. The next pass, the car was gone. The pass after that, it had returned, but now it was a different vehicle. A pickup truck, also dark, also with a motionless figure inside. The vehicles continued appearing and disappearing, changing each time. A sedan, a van, an SUV. Always with a single occupant, always motionless, always watching her pass. Jennifer realized these might be other drivers who'd been trapped here, stuck in their own loops, unable to escape. How long had they been here? Days? Years? Were they even still alive, or was she seeing ghosts, impressions left behind by people who'd vanished? Her fuel gauge showed half a tank. She'd burned through half her diesel supply, but if she was in a loop, would running out of fuel even matter? Would the truck just keep driving on empty, perpetually recycling the same stretch of highway? Jennifer tried something different. Instead of following the highway's center line, she steered toward the shoulder, intentionally crossing the white edge line on the right side. Her tires rumbled over the shoulder, and suddenly the landscape changed. The darkness on both sides gave way to a gray void, a nothingness that hurt to look at directly. The highway existed as a ribbon of asphalt floating in emptiness. There was no Iowa out there, no fields, no farmhouses, no civilization. Just void. She jerked the wheel back, pulling onto the road proper. The darkness returned, masking the void but not erasing Jennifer's knowledge of what lay beyond the pavement. The highway was all that existed here. Everything else was gone, removed, leaving only this loop floating in nothing. A new sign appeared, one Jennifer hadn't seen before. Maintenance area, 1 mile. This was different, a break in the pattern. Jennifer's hope surged. A maintenance area meant buildings, people, a potential exit from this nightmare. She watched carefully, counting down the distance. The maintenance area appeared on the right side of the highway. It consisted of a small building and a parking area, illuminated by yellow sodium lights. Jennifer took the exit, pulling her truck into the parking lot. The building was a simple concrete structure labeled Highway Maintenance District 7. One window glowed with interior light. Jennifer set her brakes, grabbed her flashlight, and climbed down from her cab. The air outside felt wrong, too still, too quiet. No wind, no insect sounds, no distant traffic, just oppressive silence. She approached the building. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open. Inside was a small office. A desk held a computer from the 1980s, monitor glowing green displaying endless scrolling numbers. A coffee maker sat on a side table, the pot half full, steam rising as if freshly brewed. A calendar on the wall showed March 2024, the current month, but all the dates had been crossed off. Not just the days that had passed, but every single date, as if the entire month had already ended. A logbook lay open on the desk. Jennifer picked it up, leafing through the pages. Each page was a driver's account, handwritten, describing how they'd entered the loop. Dozens of entries dating back years. The most recent was from 2 days ago, a driver named Tom Berkeley who'd reported the same experience Jennifer was having. His entry ended with, "Going to try driving backwards. If I'm in a loop, maybe reverse direction will break it." There was no follow-up entry from Tom. Jennifer wondered if his strategy had worked or if he was still out there, trapped in his own variation of the loop. She added her own entry to the logbook, documenting her experience. It felt important to leave a record, to contribute to the evidence that this impossible highway existed. Then she returned to her truck, started the engine, and drove back onto Interstate 80. This time, something was different. The highway felt less certain, as if acknowledging her defiance. The Walcott exit still appeared every 5 minutes, but now other signs showed up between loops. Des Moines, Council Bluffs, generic highway markers that didn't match any particular location. The highway was fragmenting, losing its grip on the geography it was mimicking. Jennifer kept driving, refusing to stop, refusing to acknowledge fear. Hours passed. Her fuel gauge dropped to a quarter tank, then to almost empty. The loop continued, but with increasing glitches. Sometimes the Walcott exit appeared on the left instead of the right. Sometimes the warning sign showed different distances or different exit numbers. Reality was breaking down. When her fuel gauge showed empty, when her truck should have coasted to a stop, Jennifer kept driving. The engine continued running, impossible but undeniable. She'd moved beyond normal physics into something else, and she decided to push that boundary as far as it would go. The highway began to twist, not physically but perceptually. The straight line became a curve, then a spiral. Jennifer's sense of up and down became confused. She might have been driving horizontally or vertically, or at some impossible angle her mind couldn't properly process. The painted lines on the road blurred into a continuous streak. Then suddenly she broke through. The highway straightened. Dawn light appeared on the horizon. Real light, not the artificial darkness that had surrounded her. A sign appeared. Council Bluffs, 23 miles. Jennifer's GPS flickered, recalibrated, and showed her exactly where she should be based on her original route. Her CB radio crackled back to life, voices of other truckers discussing traffic and weather. She'd lost 6 hours. According to her clock, it was 10 in the morning. She should have reached Omaha by now, but instead she was still in western Iowa, having barely progressed at all. Jennifer pulled into the first truck stop she found, her hands shaking too badly to continue driving. She completed the delivery later that day, saying nothing to the customer about her delay. What could she say? That she'd been trapped in a highway loop for 6 hours? That she'd seen a void beyond the road? that she'd read accounts from dozens of other drivers who'd experienced the same thing? No one would believe her. But Jennifer kept the coordinates of that maintenance area building. She filed a report with the highway department describing the location in detail. They responded that no such facility existed at those coordinates, that District 7 maintenance had been relocated in 1987. The building she'd entered, if it had ever existed, was long gone. Jennifer still drives Interstate 80. She has to. It's a major route for her business. But she's never again driven that stretch between Chicago and Omaha without feeling a deep sense of unease. Every time she passes Walcott, she watches carefully for that line where the pavement changes, where the asphalt looks too new, too perfect. So far, she hasn't encountered it again. But she knows it's out there, that section of highway that forgot it was supposed to connect two places and instead turned inward, creating its own impossible geography. And someday, Jennifer fears, she might enter that loop again, and this time, she might not find her way out. Story 5. The Convoy That Never Ended. Thomas Whitaker had spent 18 years on the road, mostly running long-haul routes through the American Southwest. He joined numerous convoys over the years, finding comfort in traveling with other truckers, the CB chatter and shared vigilance making the lonely miles pass more easily. In August of 2022, Thomas joined a convoy that would teach him that not all traveling companions were what they appeared to be. The convoy formed organically at a truck stop in Flagstaff, Arizona. Thomas had stopped for fuel and a meal, and while eating he'd chatted with 3 other drivers about their routes. All 4 were heading east on Interstate 40, making good time during the relatively cool August night. They agreed to travel together, maintaining visual contact and communicating via CB radio. It was a common practice, offering companionship and an extra set of eyes for road hazards or highway patrol. The convoy consisted of Thomas in his International Lone Star, a driver named Carl in a Peterbilt 579, a woman named Elena in a Volvo VNL, and a quiet driver named Mike in an older Kenworth W900. They left the truck stop around 11 p.m., forming up on the interstate with Thomas in the lead position. The CB chatter was friendly, typical trucker talk about weather, traffic, and the best coffee at various stops along their route. The first hour passed without incident. The convoy maintained steady spacing, moving at a comfortable 68 miles per hour through the Arizona night. The desert stretched out on both sides of the highway, dark and vast under a crescent moon. Thomas kept one eye on his mirrors, reassured by the presence of the 3 sets of headlights behind him, and occasionally contributed to the CB conversations. Around 1 a.m., just past the town of Holbrook, Thomas noticed something odd. A 4th set of headlights had joined the convoy. Another truck had slipped into their formation, positioned between Carl and Elena. Thomas hadn't seen it approach, hadn't heard any radio chatter about a new addition to their group. He keyed his CB mic. "Hey, looks like we picked up another traveler." "That you joining us, driver?" Static answered. Him for a moment, then Carl's voice. "Say again, Thomas. What was that about another driver?" "The truck between you and Elena," Thomas clarified. "Didn't catch who it was." "There's no truck between us," Elena's voice came through the radio. "I'm right behind Carl. I can see his trailer clearance lights." Thomas checked his mirrors again. 4 sets of headlights, clearly visible, spaced at regular intervals. He counted them carefully. His own truck, then Carl, then an unfamiliar truck, then Elena with Mike bringing up the rear. 5 trucks total. But according to the radio, the others only counted 4. "Carl, check your mirrors," Thomas said, keeping his voice calm. "Tell me what you see." A pause, then Carl responded. "I see Elena behind me, then Mike behind her. 3 trucks following you. 4 total, including yours. Why?" Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He was seeing 5 trucks, but the others were seeing 4. Either he was hallucinating, or something impossible was happening. He focused on the mysterious truck, trying to make out details. It was a semi-older model with a boxy sleeper cab. The headlights had a yellowish tint, like old-style sealed beam lights rather than modern LEDs. He couldn't make out the company markings or license plate. "Anyone getting interference on their radio?" Thomas asked. "Any unusual sounds?" "Negative," Mike replied, speaking for the first time in 30 minutes. "Clear signal." "Same here," Elena confirmed. Thomas decided to test something. He accelerated slightly, pushing 5 miles per hour faster. In his mirrors, he watched the convoy respond. Carl matched his speed, maintaining the gap between them. The mysterious truck also accelerated, keeping its position. So did Elena and Mike. The convoy stayed together, all 5 trucks moving in synchronized formation. He tried the opposite, slowing down by 10 miles per hour. Again, all 5 trucks adjusted, maintaining their spacing. The mysterious truck matched their movements perfectly, as if it were genuinely part of the convoy. But the others couldn't see it. Over the next hour, Thomas became increasingly obsessed with the phantom truck. He watched it constantly in his mirrors, trying to understand what he was seeing. The truck never varied its position, never drifted in its lane, maintained perfect distance. It was almost mechanical in its precision, like a vehicle being driven by a computer rather than a human. Around 2:30 a.m., Mike's voice came over the radio, sounding uncertain. "Hey, anyone else seeing something weird behind me?" Thomas's attention snapped to the rearmost truck in his mirror view. "What are you seeing, Mike?" I don't know how to describe it, like a shadow behind my truck. Darker than the darkness around it, and it's keeping pace with us." Elena spoke up, her voice tight. "I see it too, behind Mike. It's like a hole in the night." Thomas looked past all the trucks in his mirrors, straining to see what they were describing. There, barely visible, was an area of deeper darkness following the convoy. Not a vehicle exactly, but a space where the darkness was absolute, where even the faint starlight didn't penetrate, and it was maintaining the same speed as the convoy, as if connected to them by an invisible thread. Carl's voice crackled through the radio, now sounding frightened. "What the hell is this? What's going on?" Thomas tried to remain calm, to think logically. "Everyone stay steady. Maintain speed, don't panic, we're going to get through this together." But even as he spoke, Thomas saw the mysterious truck, the one only he could see, begin to change. The headlights flickered, growing brighter, then dimmer, cycling through intensities that hurt to watch. The truck itself seemed to become less solid, its outline wavering like a mirage, and through the windshield of that phantom truck, Thomas thought he saw movement. A figure in the driver's seat, but not a normal human figure. Something that was too thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. "It's getting closer," Mike called out, panic clear in his voice. "That shadow thing is getting closer." Thomas made a decision. "Everyone, on my count, we're all going to accelerate hard. Push 75, 80 if your rigs can handle it. We're going to try to outrun whatever this is. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go!" He pressed the accelerator, feeling his fully loaded truck surge forward with reluctant momentum. Behind him, through his mirrors, he saw Carl's truck accelerate as well, and Elena's and Mike's. The spacing between them grew as each truck's power and weight ratios varied, but the phantom truck stayed with Thomas, matching his speed perfectly. And according to the frantic radio chatter, the shadow behind Mike also kept pace, unfazed by the convoy's attempt to escape. They pushed 80 miles per hour, engines roaring, trailers swaying slightly with the speed. The highway unwound beneath them, mile markers flashing past. Thomas kept expecting to see flashing lights in his mirrors, a highway patrol car responding to their excessive speed. but the highway remained empty except for the convoy and its uninvited companions. Then ahead on the highway, Thomas saw something that made his heart sink. More headlights. Another convoy approaching from the opposite direction, westbound in the other lanes. At least a dozen trucks traveling together in a tight formation. As the distance between the two convoys closed, Thomas realized something was horribly wrong with the approaching trucks. They were identical to each other. Every single one was the same model, same color, same configuration. A fleet of matching trucks traveling in perfect synchronization. And as they drew close enough for Thomas to make out details, he saw that they had no drivers. The cabs were empty, lit from within by a sickly green glow, steering wheels, turning on their own to keep the trucks in their lanes. The driverless convoy passed them going the opposite direction, and as each truck went by, Thomas felt a wave of cold wash over him, as if the trucks were radiating freezing air. The CB radio erupted in terrified voices, all four of the other drivers seeing the impossible convoy and reacting with understandable panic. What the hell was that? Did you see? No drivers! There were no drivers! We need to get off this highway now, Thomas agreed, but looking ahead he saw no exits. The highway stretched forward with no off-ramps, no rest areas, nothing but the endless dark pavement. He checked his GPS. According to the device, they should have passed 2 exits by now. But there had been nothing, as if the highway had rearranged itself, removing all escape routes. The phantom truck that only Thomas could see suddenly pulled alongside him, moving into the left lane. It matched his speed, keeping perfect pace. Thomas turned his head to look directly at it, finally getting a clear view through the driver's side window. What he saw made him wish he'd kept his eyes forward. The thing in the driver's seat was using a human form like a costume. It wore a trucker's clothing, had the rough shape of a man, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, reaching down past where the seat ended. The head tilted at an angle that should have broken a neck, and when it turned to look at Thomas, he saw that its face was a blank expanse of gray skin with no features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, empty skin. The thing raised one impossibly long arm and pointed ahead down the highway. Thomas looked where it was pointing and saw the road changing. The asphalt was becoming less solid, more transparent, revealing something beneath. Old pavement from decades ago layered under the modern highway. And beneath that, older still. And deeper still, Thomas could see what looked like dirt roads, and beneath those, animal trails, and beneath those, nothing but raw earth. The highway was showing its history. All the roads that had ever existed in this location layered like sedimentary rock. And traveling on those deeper, older roads were shapes, vehicles from other eras, horse-drawn wagons, ancient travelers on foot, all moving in eternal convoys, trapped in transit forever, unable to reach their destinations. Thomas understood then what was happening. The highway had caught them, added them to its collection of travelers. They were becoming part of the eternal convoy, joining the driverless trucks and the phantom vehicles and all the other lost travelers who'd been absorbed into the road's endless journey. "Everyone, stop!" Thomas shouted into the CB. "Hit your brakes, we have to stop moving." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Thomas stood on his brakes, feeling his truck shudder as the air brakes engaged, hearing the trailer tires scream in protest. Behind him, through his mirrors, he saw Carl's truck begin to slow as well, then Elena's, then Mike's. They all came to a stop, forming a stationary line of trucks in the right lane. The phantom truck beside Thomas didn't stop. It continued forward, accelerating away, and as it did, it became more transparent, more ghost-like, until it simply faded from view entirely. Behind the convoy, Mike reported that the shadow had also vanished, dissolving like mist in sunlight. For a long moment, the four drivers sat in their stopped trucks, radios silent, engines idling, none of them quite believing they'd survived. Then ahead on the highway, Thomas saw welcome lights. A rest area appearing like a beacon of normalcy. Exit ramps had returned to the highway. The GPS showed their correct location again. "Everyone okay?" Thomas finally asked over the radio. 3 affirmative responses came back, shaky but genuine. They were okay. They were real. They were still themselves, not absorbed into whatever strange collection of travelers the highway had tried to claim them for. The convoy stayed together until dawn, pulling into a truck stop in Albuquerque for a long breakfast and longer conversation. They shared what they'd seen, comparing notes, trying to make sense of the impossible. Carl had seen empty trucks. Elena had seen the shadow. Mike had felt something trying to pull him backward, out of his cab and into that darkness behind him. Thomas told them about the phantom truck and the thing that wasn't quite human driving it. They agreed never to convoy with strangers again, to be more careful about who they traveled with. The highway, they'd learned, wasn't always just a road. Sometimes it was alive or aware or existed in more dimensions than the physical. And sometimes it reached out to claim travelers, adding them to an eternal convoy that rolled on through darkness with no beginning and no end. Thomas still sees convoys forming at truck stops, drivers agreeing to travel together for companionship and safety. He never joins them. He drives alone now, trusting only himself, taking breaks when needed, never pushing through the night when fatigue makes the highway seem strange. Because he knows what's out there, traveling the roads alongside normal traffic. The phantom trucks and the empty shadows and all the lost convoys that never reached their destinations. They're still out there, still rolling, still looking for new travelers to join them. And Thomas Whitaker has no intention of ever answering their invitation again. Story 6. The Rest Area Between. Diana Torres had been a professional truck driver for 21 years, establishing herself as one of the most reliable drivers in the Pacific Northwest regional network. She specialized in time-sensitive deliveries, building a reputation for always arriving on schedule regardless of weather or traffic conditions. In April of 2023, Diana made a routine stop at a rest area that would challenge everything she understood about geography and the spaces between places. The delivery schedule was tight but manageable. Pick up electronics from a warehouse in Portland and deliver to a distributor in Boise before their 8 a.m. opening. Diana loaded up at 4 p.m., allowing herself plenty of time for the 7-hour drive. She'd run this route dozens of times, knew every twist and turn of Highway 84 through the Columbia River Gorge, then Interstate 84 through eastern Oregon and into Idaho. The weather forecast was clear. Traffic should be light through the night, and her truck had just passed its maintenance inspection. Everything pointed to a smooth, uneventful run. Diana left Portland as planned, making good time through the gorge as the sun set behind the Cascade Mountains. The highway followed the Columbia River, cliffs rising on one side, water stretching away on the other. She'd always found this stretch beautiful, even at night when she could only see suggestions of the landscape in the darkness beyond her headlights. Her GPS showed her progress, the estimated arrival time holding steady at 7:45 a.m., giving her a comfortable buffer before the delivery window opened. Around 9 p.m. somewhere in eastern Oregon, past the town of Pendleton, Diana began to feel the effects of the early start to her day. She'd been awake since 5 a.m., handling paperwork and loading supervision before starting the drive. Nothing critical, but enough fatigue that pulling over for a quick break seemed wise. She watched for the next rest area, knowing there was one coming up that she'd used many times before. The sign appeared right on schedule. Rest area 1 mile. Diana signaled and prepared to exit. The rest area was nothing special. A standard highway facility with parking for trucks and cars, restrooms, a few covered picnic tables and vending machines. She'd stopped here at least 20 times over the years. It was familiar, safe, exactly what she needed for a 15-minute break. But as Diana took the exit ramp, something felt different. The curve of the ramp seemed sharper than she remembered. The pavement was smoother, newer. When she reached the rest area parking lot, Diana found herself somewhere that was both familiar and wrong. The layout was correct. The bathroom building stood in the right location. The picnic shelter was where it should be. But everything looked different. The buildings appeared freshly painted, the landscaping newly installed with small trees that shouldn't have fit the mature growth she remembered. The light poles were an older style with fixtures she associated with rest areas from decades ago. It was as if she'd arrived at this rest area but in a different time period. Diana parked her truck in one of the designated spaces, set her brakes, and climbed down from the cab. The air felt strange, too still without the usual breeze that funneled through this part of Oregon. She could hear her own footsteps with unusual clarity, each sound distinct and unnaturally loud. No other vehicles were visible in the parking lot, though her headlights had caught reflections from what looked like other parked vehicles as she'd pulled in. She walked toward the restroom building, her hand on the flashlight clipped to her belt, though the area was well lit. The building's door was modern, which didn't match the older light poles and landscaping. Diana pushed it open and stepped into a clean, well-maintained facility that looked exactly like rest area bathrooms everywhere. Nothing obviously wrong, but the feeling of wrongness persisted. As Diana washed her hands, she noticed the mirror. Her reflection looked normal, but the reflection of the room behind her was different. The tiles were a different color, green instead of beige. The stall doors were wooden rather than metal. And standing in one of the stalls, visible in the reflection but not when Diana turned around, was a woman in clothing from what looked like the 1970s. Diana backed out of the restroom quickly, her heart hammering. She'd never seen anything genuinely supernatural before, never believed in ghosts or parallel dimensions or any of that. But what she'd just seen had no rational explanation. She returned to her truck, intending to leave immediately, get back on the highway, and chalk this up to fatigue playing tricks on her perception. But her truck wouldn't start. The engine turned over, all the sounds correct, but it wouldn't catch and run. Diana tried repeatedly, pumping the accelerator, checking gauges, looking for warning lights. Everything seemed normal, but the engine refused to start. It was as if something was preventing her from leaving. Diana grabbed her phone to call for roadside assistance. No signal, not even a single bar, despite this area usually having decent coverage. Her CB radio also picked up nothing, just empty static across all channels. She was effectively cut off, stranded in this rest area that felt increasingly unreal. Movement caught her eye in the side mirror. Other vehicles were appearing in the parking lot, not driving in but materializing, fading into existence like images loading on a slow internet connection. An RV from the 1980s, a sedan from the 60s, a pickup truck that looked like it belonged in a museum. And walking between these vehicles were people, travelers in clothing from different eras, moving with the slow, purposeless motion of people who had nowhere to go. Diana locked her doors, though some part of her recognized the futility of the gesture. If these were ghosts or dimensional echoes or whatever impossible thing they appeared to be, a door lock wouldn't stop them. She watched as more people appeared, dozens of them now, filling the rest area parking lot. Some walked toward the bathroom. Others sat at the picnic tables. A few stood motionless, staring at nothing, expressions vacant. Then Diana noticed something that made her stomach drop. Among the crowd, she saw modern vehicles, cars and trucks from recent years, some that could have been driven off a lot this week. And the people associated with those vehicles wore contemporary clothing, carried smartphones, looked like they belonged in 2023. These weren't all ghosts from the past. Some of these people were recent, possibly even current. A woman approached Diana's truck walking with steady purpose across the parking lot. She looked normal, alive, dressed in modern clothes, maybe 40 years old. She came right up to Diana's window and knocked on the glass. Diana hesitated, then cracked the window a few inches. "Don't turn off your engine," the woman said urgently. "Whatever you do, don't turn it off. Keep it running." "My engine is off," Diana replied. "It won't start again." The woman's face fell. "Then you're stuck here like the rest of us. This place doesn't let you leave once your engine stops." Diana's fear crystallized into something more specific. "How long have you been here?" "3 days," the woman said. "I pulled in for a quick break, turned off my engine while I used the bathroom, and when I came back, my car wouldn't start. It's been 3 days and I can't leave, and more people keep arriving and nobody ever leaves." "That's impossible," Diana said, though she was arguing more with the situation than with the woman. "People must have noticed. Your family, the police, someone must be looking for you." The woman shook her head. "Time works differently here. Out there on the highway, I think only minutes have passed. But in here, we're caught in some kind of pocket, a space between spaces. I've talked to others. Some have been here for weeks in their perception. One guy claims he's been here for 3 years. Diana looked past the woman at the crowded rest area. Dozens of people, maybe more, all trapped in this impossible space. There has to be a way out, a pattern, a rule, something we can exploit. "If there is, nobody's found it yet," the woman said. "People appear, time passes for them, but they never leave. We eat food from the vending machines, but the machines never empty. We sleep in our vehicles, but we never feel truly rested. It's like we're stuck in a loop, but the loop doesn't reset. It just continues, accumulating more trapped travelers." Diana refused to accept this. She'd built her career on problem solving, on finding solutions when situations seemed impossible. There had to be a way out. She opened her door and climbed down from the cab, ignoring the woman's warning that leaving the truck was dangerous. Walking through the rest area, Diana noticed the layering of realities. The modern bathroom building sometimes flickered, showing older versions of itself underneath. The parking lot pavement would occasionally become dirt, then gravel, then asphalt again. It was as if multiple timelines were occupying the same space, all the different versions of this rest area that had existed over the decades stacked on top of each other. She approached an older man sitting at a picnic table, someone who looked like he'd been a trucker based on his clothing and the way he carried himself. "How long have you been here?" Diana asked. The man looked up at her with tired eyes. "I pulled in for a break in 1997. According to my watch, that was 3 months ago. But I don't age here. Don't get hungry, don't get thirsty, don't need to sleep, though I sometimes do anyway, just to pass the time. This place has caught us outside of normal time. We're in the between." "The between?" "The space between places," the man explained. "Every rest area, every stop along the highway, it exists between point A and point B. But this one, something went wrong with it. Maybe it was always wrong, or maybe something happened that broke it. Now it exists between time as well as between places. And once you stop here, once your vehicle's engine turns off, you're caught." Diana walked back toward the highway, trying to see if she could simply walk out of the rest area on foot. But as she approached the exit ramp, the pavement seemed to stretch, extending the distance no matter how far she walked. She could see the highway in the distance, hear the occasional vehicle passing by, but she never got closer. The space had become elastic, expanding to prevent escape. She returned to the parking lot, mind racing through possibilities. The woman who'd first warned her was talking to other trapped travelers, sharing Diana's arrival as the latest addition to their company. Diana ignored them, focusing on her truck. If the problem was that engines wouldn't restart, then maybe the solution was to never let the engine fully stop in the first place. But her engine was already off. That option was gone. Diana needed to think differently. She climbed back into her cab and examined her GPS. The device showed her location as the rest area, but the timestamp was wrong. According to the GPS, it was still 9 p.m. on the night she'd arrived. Hours had passed inside the rest area, conversations had taken place, Diana had walked around and explored, but according to the GPS, no time had passed at all. Time wasn't progressing normally here, or more accurately, time inside the rest area wasn't connected to time outside. They were in a pocket, isolated from the flow of normal causality. Diana remembered a physics article she'd read once about how time might not be universal, how different reference frames could experience time at different rates. Maybe this rest area had somehow become disconnected from the normal reference frame, creating its own isolated bubble where the rules were different. If that was true, then maybe the solution wasn't to escape physically, but to somehow reconnect the rest areas, time to normal time. But how? Diana had no idea how to manipulate time or reality or whatever strange physics governed this place. She sat in her cab, watching the trapped travelers mill around the parking lot, and noticed something. The people from older eras, the ghosts or echoes or whatever they were fading. Not disappearing, but becoming more transparent, less solid, as if their connection to this place was weakening. The more recent arrivals, including Diana and the woman who'd warned her, remained solid and real. Maybe the rest area was degrading, its hold on trapped travelers weakening over time. Not quickly enough to help anyone escape soon, but at least suggesting that the phenomenon wasn't permanent. Or maybe Diana thought the older travelers were finally being allowed to leave, their time in this between space coming to an end. Diana made a decision. She'd wait, but not passively. She'd document everything, interview every trapped traveler, collect data about when they'd arrived, how long they'd been here, any patterns they'd noticed. If she was going to be stuck here, she'd use the time productively, gathering information that might help her and others escape. Days passed, or what felt like days. Diana lost track of time. Her watch continued running, but whether the hours it showed corresponded to real hours outside the rest area, she couldn't tell. More travelers arrived, pulled in by the innocent sign promising a rest stop. Diana warned each one, told them what she'd learned, but it did no good. Their engines stopped, and they became trapped. Then on what Diana's watch claimed was the 7th day, something changed. She was sleeping in her cab when a sound woke her. An engine starting. She looked out and saw one of the cars, a modern sedan that had arrived 2 days after her, driving away. The driver looked stunned but didn't stop, didn't question the miracle. He drove down the exit ramp and merged back onto the highway, accelerating away into the night. Over the next hour, 3 more vehicles started successfully and left. Then Diana's own truck roared to life without her touching the key. The engine simply started on its own, as if the rest area had decided to release her. Diana didn't hesitate. She put the truck in gear and drove, following the exit ramp back to the highway. As she merged back into traffic, she looked at her clock. According to the time, only 20 minutes had passed since she'd pulled into the rest area. 7 subjective days collapsed into 20 objective minutes. Diana completed her delivery to Boise on schedule. She said nothing about the rest area, knowing no one would believe her. But she filed a report with the State Highway Department, claiming the rest area had inadequate lighting and poor signage, recommending it be closed for safety evaluation. Her report was acknowledged but never acted upon. The rest area remained open, marked on maps, waiting for the next traveler who needed to stop. Diana never used that rest area again, driving past it even when she desperately needed a break. And she started watching other rest stops more carefully. looking for signs of wrongness, for indications that a place might be disconnected from normal space and time. The highway system, she'd learned, wasn't just a network of roads connecting cities. It was full of pockets and gaps, between spaces where reality worked differently. And those spaces were hungry, always ready to catch unwary travelers and hold them in impossible prisons disguised as innocent rest areas. Story 7. The Dispatcher Who Wasn't Real. Kevin Ramirez had been an independent owner-operator for 12 years, hauling general freight across the eastern United States. He'd built solid relationships with several dispatchers who kept him supplied with consistent loads, maintaining high enough volume that he rarely had empty miles. In January of 2024, Kevin started working with a new dispatcher who would make him question the nature of reality and who was really controlling the routes drivers followed. The dispatcher contacted him through an industry load board, a common way for independent drivers to find work. The message was professional and straightforward: consistent routes, good pay, reliable schedule. The company was listed as Meridian Logistics, based in Atlanta. Kevin did basic due diligence, checking the company's authority number with the Department of Transportation, verifying their insurance coverage, confirming they had proper credentials. Everything checked out. He agreed to try one load and see how the relationship developed. The first job was simple: pick up manufactured goods from a warehouse in Charlotte and deliver to a distribution center in Baltimore. Kevin made the pickup on a Wednesday morning, the cargo loaded without incident. The dispatcher, who identified himself only as Control, sent detailed routing instructions via text message. The route was slightly unconventional, using smaller highways rather than the major interstates, but Control explained this would avoid construction delays and save time. Kevin followed the routing, finding the roads clear and traffic light. The delivery went smoothly. Payment arrived in his account within 24 hours, exactly as promised. He agreed to take another load from Meridian Logistics, then another. Over the next 2 weeks, Kevin completed 6 deliveries, all routed through Control, all paying well and proceeding without complications. But Kevin began noticing odd patterns. The routes Control provided always avoided major truck stops and well-traveled rest areas. Instead, the routing instructions directed Kevin to small, independent fuel stations and isolated parking areas for his mandatory breaks. When Kevin questioned this, Control explained that Meridian had negotiated fuel discounts at specific locations and preferred drivers use them. The explanation seemed reasonable. The cargo itself was always sealed containers with manifests listing generic descriptions: industrial equipment, manufactured components, commercial supplies. Kevin never saw the actual contents, which wasn't unusual for sealed freight. Drivers weren't supposed to open sealed cargo. Their job was transportation, not inspection. On the 7th load, Kevin started feeling like he was being watched. Not just the general awareness of security cameras and other vehicles, but a specific constant sensation of eyes on him whenever he stopped. At fuel stations, he'd turn quickly, trying to catch whoever was observing him, but saw no one suspicious. The feeling persisted, growing stronger with each delivery. Kevin tried calling Meridian's office number. The call connected, but an automated system answered, directing him to leave a message or communicate via the load board messaging system. He never spoke to a human other than the warehouse workers who loaded and received his cargo. Control communicated exclusively through text messages, always responding quickly but never agreeing to a phone conversation. On the 8th load, the routing became stranger. Control directed Kevin through rural Kentucky, using county roads that barely appeared on his GPS. The instructions were precise, detailing every turn, every landmark to watch for. Kevin followed them, hauling his sealed cargo through increasingly isolated terrain. At one point, the road passed through a small town that seemed abandoned. Empty buildings, no vehicles, no people visible. Kevin's CB radio picked up nothing but static. Then the routing instructions directed him to stop at a specific location, a wide spot in the road where the pavement ended and gravel began. Control's message said, "Stop here for mandatory break. Duration 30 minutes, do not exit vehicle." Kevin pulled over, confused but compliant. He set a timer for 30 minutes. While parked, Kevin heard sounds around his truck. Footsteps on gravel, voices too faint to make out words, the scrape of something against his trailer. He checked his mirrors but saw nothing. The sounds continued, circling the truck as if people were inspecting it from all sides. Kevin's hand moved to his door lock, confirming it was engaged. At exactly 30 minutes, Control sent a new message. "Resume route. Follow next instruction immediately." The sounds outside stopped. Kevin started his engine and continued driving, following Control's routing through more empty country roads. The delivery destination for that load was a warehouse that Kevin couldn't find on any map. The address Control provided didn't appear in his GPS. But the routing instructions led him directly there, a modern facility in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest. Workers unloaded his cargo with efficient silence, never speaking to Kevin, barely acknowledging his presence. Payment arrived in his account, the same as always. Kevin decided to research Meridian Logistics more thoroughly. The DIOT authority number was valid, but when he looked deeper, he found something disturbing. The company had been established only 3 months ago, right before Kevin started working with them. The listed officers of the company had no prior business history he could find. The Atlanta address was a virtual office, a mail drop with no physical presence. He tried to decline the next load offer, but Control sent a message that made Kevin's blood run cold. Contract obligations remain in force. 9 loads completed. 3 remain in current agreement. Failure to complete will result in penalties as outlined in terms of service. Kevin checked the agreement he'd signed through the load board. He'd skimmed it initially, focusing on pay rates and delivery schedules. Now, reading carefully, he found clauses he didn't remember seeing before. Penalties for contract breach included forfeiture of all previous payments and additional liquidated damages that would bankrupt him. Kevin accepted the 10th load. The pickup was in Pennsylvania, the delivery in Virginia. But this time, Control's routing instructions directed him to drive at night, using only routes with minimal traffic. The cargo felt heavier than the manifest claimed, though Kevin's scale showed the documented weight. Every instinct told Kevin something was wrong, but he was trapped by the contract, by the debt he'd incur if he refused. Halfway through the route, Kevin noticed his fuel gauge reading was wrong. He'd fueled up at the start, should have been at 3/4 full, but the gauge showed half. He checked his fuel logs. The numbers didn't match. According to his records, he was burning fuel at an impossible rate, almost double what his truck normally consumed. Yet the engine ran normally, performance unchanged. Control sent a message, "Proceed to waypoint for fuel stop." Coordinates followed. Kevin entered them in his GPS and found himself directed to a location that wasn't a fuel station. It was just a wide spot on a forest road, completely isolated. But as he approached, he saw fuel pumps, standing alone in the darkness with no building, no canopy, no signs. The pumps were old-fashioned, the kind with mechanical number wheels rather than digital displays. Kevin fueled up, though he had no way to pay. No card reader, no attendant, no payment system he could see. He pumped diesel into his tank until it was full, then climbed back in his cab and continued driving. Control never asked for payment confirmation. The fuel simply appeared in some ledger Kevin couldn't access. On the 11th load, Kevin saw other trucks. They appeared at the isolated stops Control routed him to, other drivers following similar mysterious instructions. Kevin tried to talk to them, to compare notes, but none of them would engage in conversation. They moved with mechanical precision, fueling their trucks, inspecting their cargo, then driving away without acknowledging Kevin's presence. He noticed something about these other drivers. They all looked similar. Not identical, but similar. Same build, same weathered appearance, same tired eyes. And their trucks, while different makes and models, all had a quality that was hard to define. They looked too clean, too perfect, like photographs of trucks rather than real vehicles that had accumulated miles in road grime. Kevin began to suspect he was the only real driver in this network. The others were something else. Automated trucks, perhaps, or driver simulators, or phenomena he couldn't explain. And Control wasn't a person, wasn't even a company. It was something using the shell of a logistics company to move cargo through networks that existed outside normal commerce. On the 12th load, the final one in his contract, Control's routing instructions led Kevin to a delivery location he recognized. It was a warehouse in his home city of Wilmington, North Carolina, a facility he'd delivered to many times for legitimate companies. Kevin felt a surge of relief. Finally, a return to normal operation, to the familiar world of legitimate freight hauling. But when he arrived at the warehouse, it was different. The building was the same, but the signage had changed. The people working there were the same workers he'd seen at other Meridian deliveries, moving with that same eerie efficiency. They unloaded his cargo, and as they removed the last container, one of them looked directly at Kevin and spoke. "Contract complete. You're released." Kevin drove away without waiting for formal checkout. He checked his bank account and found all payments were there, every load accounted for, the total adding up to substantial income for 3 weeks of work. But he also found a new message in his load board account. A completion certificate from Meridian Logistics thanking him for his service and indicating his performance qualified him for preferred contractor status for future opportunities. Kevin deleted the message. He blocked Meridian Logistics on the load board. He started taking loads only from established companies with physical offices where he could talk to real people face to face. But sometimes, late at night, he'd receive text messages from Control, offering loads with exceptional pay and convenient routing. Kevin never responded, never acknowledged these messages. But they kept coming, patient and persistent, as if Control knew that eventually Kevin might be desperate enough or curious enough to accept. Kevin also started noticing other drivers who had the same look as those phantom truckers at Meridian stops. He'd see them at normal truck stops now, at regular fuel stations moving through the world of legitimate commerce. But they never quite fit in, never quite seemed real, and Kevin wondered how many drivers out there were like him, having worked for companies that weren't quite real, following routing instructions from dispatchers who might not be human, hauling cargo whose contents and purposes remained forever mysterious. The highway system, Kevin realized, had layers. The visible layer of legitimate commerce and regulated transportation. And beneath that, another network using the same roads but operating under different rules, controlled by entities that existed in the spaces between normal business and reality. He'd been recruited into that hidden network, served his purpose, and been released back into normal operation. But the network knew who he was now. It had his contact information, his bank details, his service record. And Kevin suspected that once you'd worked for them, once you'd proven you could follow their routing and ask minimal questions, they never completely let you go. They just waited, patient and eternal, for the next time they needed a driver willing to haul cargo through the spaces between normal routes, cargo that couldn't be transported through legitimate channels. And Kevin feared that someday, when his finances were tight or his options limited, he might accept another load from Control. And this time, the contract might not allow him to leave at all. Story 8. The Mile That Repeats. Sarah Kim had spent 14 years driving trucks professionally, building expertise in refrigerated pharmaceutical transport. The work demanded precision and reliability, transporting temperature-sensitive medications and vaccines that could save lives if delivered properly or become worthless if mishandled. In July of 2023, Sarah accepted a rush delivery that would expose her to a phenomenon she'd spent months trying to understand. The pharmaceutical company contracted her for an emergency transport, experimental medication needed at a hospital in Denver within 18 hours. The pickup was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the route straightforward up Interstate 25. Sarah had made this run dozens of times. The pay was excellent, reflecting the urgency and the valuable cargo. She loaded the refrigerated containers at 6 p.m., verified all temperature monitors were functioning, and departed immediately. The drive started normally. Sarah maintained 65 miles per hour, monitoring her refrigeration unit constantly, checking temperature logs every 30 minutes as required by her protocol. The highway stretched north through New Mexico, passing through familiar landscape that she could navigate in her sleep. Traffic was light for a Friday evening. Weather conditions were perfect. Everything pointed to an easy, successful delivery. Around 8 p.m., approximately 40 miles south of Santa Fe, Sarah passed mile marker 267. She noted it automatically, part of the constant awareness long-haul drivers develop. The marker looked standard, nothing distinctive about it. She continued driving, eyes on the road, music playing at low volume, completely confident in her route. 30 minutes later, Sarah passed mile marker 267 again. She frowned, checking her odometer. She definitely traveled at least 20 miles since seeing that marker before. Her GPS showed her progressing normally, the blue dot moving steadily north toward Santa Fe. But there was the marker, identical to the one she'd passed earlier. Same green sign, same white lettering, same position relative to the highway. Sarah considered the possibilities. Maybe she'd misread the first marker. Maybe she was more tired than she realized and had lost track of time. She checked her logs. Exactly 30 minutes had passed since she'd noted mile 267 the first time. Her odometer confirmed she'd covered the expected distance. Everything except that repeated mile marker indicated normal travel. She drove on, more alert now, watching for the next mile marker. Mile 268 appeared right on schedule, about a mile ahead. Then mile 269. Sarah started to relax. She'd simply made a mistake, seen the marker wrong initially, or forgotten that she'd stopped for some reason and doubled back. Though she had no memory of stopping and her log showed continuous travel. 25 minutes after passing mile 269, Sarah saw mile marker 267 again. This time there was no mistaking it, the same marker in the same location appearing a third time, and she'd traveled consistently, never turned around, never exited the highway. Yet somehow she'd looped back to mile 267. Sarah grabbed her CB radio. Breaker 19, this is Frost Hall, Sarah, northbound on I-25 near Santa Fe. Anyone got ears? Something weird is happening with the mile markers. Static answered her. She tried again, still nothing. She checked her cell phone. Full signal according to the display, but when she tried to call her dispatcher, the call wouldn't connect. It would dial, show connected, but no sound came through. She decided to pull over at the next exit and assess the situation. But no exit appeared. Sarah drove for what felt like 40 minutes, watching for the blue exit signs that should have appeared regularly along this stretch of highway. She saw nothing. Just empty highway, mile markers appearing in sequence, 267, 268, 269, then somehow cycling back to 267 again. Sarah checked her cargo. All temperature readings were stable, exactly where they should be. Her truck was functioning perfectly. Fuel consumption was normal. Every instrument and gauge showed that she was traveling through normal space, burning real fuel, covering actual distance. Yet the mile markers insisted she was trapped in a 4-mile loop. She tried a different approach. When mile marker 267 appeared for the 4th time, Sarah decided to watch for any other distinguishing features. She noted everything: a specific tree on the left side of the highway, a particular pattern of cracks in the pavement, a faded advertisement on a billboard. Then she drove, memorizing the landscape. When she reached what should have been a new section of highway, everything matched. The same tree, the same pavement cracks, the same billboard. She was definitely traveling through a repeating section of road. Sarah experimented with different speeds. She tried driving faster, pushing 75 miles per hour. The loop continued, though it took slightly less time to complete. She tried driving slower, down to 50 miles per hour. The loop persisted, taking proportionally longer but still cycling back to mile 267. Speed didn't matter. She was caught in some kind of geographic anomaly that didn't care how fast she traveled through it. She examined her cargo again, wondering if something about the pharmaceutical containers was causing the phenomenon. Maybe the medications were experimental in ways the company hadn't disclosed. Maybe they emitted radiation or energy fields or something that could warp space around them. But the containers looked ordinary, the temperature monitors showing normal readings, nothing to suggest they were causing reality to fold back on itself. Around midnight, Sarah had completed approximately 15 loops. She'd stopped counting carefully, focusing instead on trying to find any variation, any change that might indicate a way to break free. That's when she noticed the car. It appeared in her mirrors, headlights approaching from behind. Another vehicle traveling the same direction, moving faster than Sarah's truck. Finally, another person who might be experiencing the same phenomenon. Sarah slowed down, letting the car catch up. As it drew alongside her, Sarah tried to see the driver. The interior was lit and she could make out a figure behind the wheel. A woman, middle-aged, focused on the road ahead. Sarah waved, trying to get her attention, but the woman didn't look over, didn't acknowledge Sarah's truck. The car pulled ahead and gradually disappeared into the darkness beyond Sarah's headlights. Sarah maintained her speed, expecting to see the car again when the loop reset. But the car never reappeared. Somehow it had traveled through the loop and continued onward while Sarah remained trapped. Unless, Sarah thought, the car was part of the loop itself. Not a real vehicle with a real driver, but an echo of someone who'd passed through this stretch of highway at some point in the past. A recording playing on repeat, just like the landscape and the mile markers. Sarah started seeing more vehicles. Not continuously, but occasionally during her loops, other cars and trucks would appear, always traveling the same direction, always passing through without stopping or acknowledging her presence. She tried following them, matching their speed exactly, thinking maybe they knew the secret to escaping the loop. But they'd simply fade away after a few minutes, vanishing like ghosts. Her fatigue was becoming a serious concern. Sarah had been awake for 18 hours, driven for 7 of those hours, and spent the last 5 trapped in this impossible loop. She needed sleep, but stopping felt dangerous. What if she fell asleep and woke to find her truck had been moving on its own, driving the loop without a conscious driver? What if the loop had been doing this to travelers for years and she'd find herself surrounded by abandoned vehicles, drivers who'd fallen asleep and never woken up? Sarah forced herself to stay alert, drinking coffee from her thermos, playing music loudly, doing everything she could to fight off exhaustion. She watched the mile markers cycle past: 267, 268, 269, 267, 268, 269, an endless sequence that mocked the very concept of progress. Then around 3 a.m., something changed. Sarah passed mile marker 267 and noticed a car pulled over on the shoulder ahead. Not a ghost car that appeared and disappeared, but a real vehicle, stationary, hazard lights flashing. Sarah slowed and pulled over behind it. She set her brakes, grabbed her flashlight, and climbed down from her cab, prepared to offer assistance. As she approached the car, Sarah saw movement inside. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He looked exhausted, disheveled, desperate. "Thank God," he said, "another real person. I've been stuck here for 3 days." 3 days? Sarah repeated, shocked. "In this loop? You've noticed it too? The mile markers repeating? I thought I was losing my mind. I've tried everything to break free, but nothing works. I'm out of food, almost out of water. My phone won't make calls. I've seen other vehicles, but you're the first person who's actually stopped." Sarah felt her stomach sink. If this man had been here for 3 days, what did that mean for her delivery? The medication in her cargo was time-sensitive, needing to reach Denver within 18 hours of loading. She'd already used 7 hours. But if time worked differently in this loop, maybe those hours didn't count. Or maybe they counted double and she'd already missed her delivery window. "We need to figure out how to escape," Sarah said. "There has to be a way." "Have you tried driving backward, reversing through the loop?" "Tried it," the man said. "The truck just spins out when I try to reverse, like the road won't allow backward movement. I've tried stopping completely, tried running away on foot, tried everything I can think of. Nothing works." Sarah thought about the ghost vehicles she'd seen, the ones that passed through the loop without getting trapped. What was different about them? Why could they continue while real drivers with real vehicles got caught? "The other vehicles that passed through," Sarah said. "Have you noticed anything about them? Any pattern?" "They're not really there," the man said. "I figured that out yesterday. I tried flagging one down, stood in the middle of the highway waving my arms. The car just drove through me, not around me, through me, like I wasn't solid. Like I'm the ghost and they're real." Sarah considered this. If they were the ghosts, if somehow being trapped in the loop had removed them from normal reality, then maybe the solution was to become more real, to reassert their presence in the normal world. But how? She returned to her truck and checked her cargo again. The temperature monitors showed a discrepancy she hadn't noticed before. The internal clock on one monitor showed 9:47 p.m., several hours earlier than her truck's clock, which read 3:12 a.m. The cargo was experiencing time differently than she was. The refrigeration unit was working in real time, in the normal world outside the loop, while Sarah's consciousness was trapped in this repeated mile. That gave her an idea. If the cargo was still connected to normal time, maybe she could use that connection to pull herself out of the loop. She couldn't explain the physics of how it might work, but she'd seen enough impossible things tonight to know that logic and physics weren't reliable guides anymore. Sarah started her truck and resumed driving. But this time she focused entirely on the cargo behind her, on the medications that existed in normal time, on the hospital in Denver where people were waiting for those drugs. She visualized the destination, imagined herself arriving and making the delivery, refused to acknowledge the repeating mile markers or the impossible loop. Mile marker 267 approached. Sarah didn't look at it. She kept her eyes forward, her mind focused on her destination, denying the loop's existence. Mile marker 268, still refusing to acknowledge the trap. Mile marker 269, and then finally mile marker 270. Sarah's breath caught. A new number. She'd broken through. She glanced in her mirrors, looking for the stranded driver she'd met, but his car was gone. She grabbed her CB radio. "Breaker 19, anyone near mile 270 on I-25? A voice answered immediately, another trucker confirming the location and asking if she needed assistance. Sarah's phone showed the correct time. Calls worked normally. Her GPS showed her exactly where she should be. She'd escaped the loop, though she had no clear understanding of how. The simple act of refusing to acknowledge the trap, of focusing on her connection to normal reality through her cargo, had somehow been enough. Or maybe she'd just been lucky, happening to break free at the exact moment the loop weakened or released her. Sarah completed the delivery to Denver with 3 hours to spare in her deadline. The hospital staff accepted the cargo, completely unaware of the impossible journey it had taken to arrive. Sarah collected her payment, logged the trip as normal, and said nothing about the hours she'd spent trapped in a 4-mile loop that shouldn't exist. But she filed a report with the Department of Transportation, describing mile marker 267 on Interstate 25 as a potential hazard zone. Her report was logged, but dismissed as driver fatigue or hallucination. No investigation was conducted. The mile marker remained where it was, waiting for the next driver to become trapped in its impossible cycle. Sarah still drives that route occasionally, transporting pharmaceuticals from Albuquerque to Denver. She always passes mile marker 267 with a mixture of fear and defiance, watching carefully to see if it will repeat. So far, it's remained singular, appearing once and only once during each trip. But Sarah knows the loop is still there, still active, still catching unlucky travelers who pass through at the wrong time or under the wrong conditions. And sometimes, late at night when she's driving that stretch of highway, she sees vehicles pulled over on the shoulder near mile 267, hazard lights flashing. Drivers standing beside them looking lost and desperate. Sarah never stops to help anymore. She's learned that some traps can't be escaped by well-meaning intervention, and sometimes the best you can do is keep driving. Maintain your connection to the real world and hope that your journey continues forward rather than folding back on itself into an endless, impossible loop.